Hey y'all, we're going to do another Sunday school lesson on the book of Daniel. I have prayed for us as I always do, and for me to be able to share and help us learn what this book is all about. I want to review just a minute. We did chapters 1 and 2 together, and in chapter 1, King Nebuchadnezzar kidnapped several young men to come to his kingdom and serve him. And when he kidnapped these young men, he completely transformed them. He castrated them. He wanted them to eat the way that he wanted to eat. He changed their language. He changed everything that he possibly could change about them. But of course, we know Daniel stood up to him about the food, and he would not eat the king's food. And the second chapter, King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he wanted his wise men to tell him what his dream was about and to give him the interpretation of the dream. Of course, they could not do that. So, long story short, God gives Daniel the interpretation of the dream and the meaning of the dream, and what the dream was, I should say. And he shares that with King Nebuchadnezzar, and of course he gets a raise, he gets a promotion. And I wanted to make sure I let you know that King Nebuchadnezzar he gave glory to Daniel's God. He is seeing that the one true God is the real God. He's not there yet, but he's seeing that. And so he did give accolades to God. And I also want to mention that I know that I said Daniel ate fruits and vegetables. I should have just said vegetables and left out the fruit, but I'm just used to saying that. And sometimes when you teach and you get going fast, you just say words that really don't have doesn't make a whole lot of difference. But I want to make sure that if anybody's freaking out because I said fruit and vegetables, don't freak out. It could have been fruits and vegetables, but of course the Bible just says vegetables. So now this week we're going to be in chapter 3, and what has happened is, let me review the dream with you real quick from chapter 2. I don't know if you remember, but King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream about what I call metal man. Metal man is not in the Bible, but metal man, he represents countries, and of course that will come later. We'll learn more about that later. But what Daniel told him is that King Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold of this man, of this powerful display of different nations. And he told him, you are the head of gold. So what's happened is King Nebuchadnezzar gets the big head because he sees that he is, he's the top dog on these nations. And so what he's done is he starts out in chapter 3, and he says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits. So King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. This image was huge. It was 90 foot tall, but it was only about 9 foot wide, so it was kind of out of proportion. But it was very narrow, and he was representing himself in this statue because of his dream, and he found out he was the head of gold through all these nations that we will learn about later. He's going to make a statue of himself. And here is this statue. It's on a base, and he makes this huge, tall statue of gold. And the Bible doesn't say whether it was pure gold or if it was overlaid in gold. It doesn't matter. But he wanted to represent himself in a grand expression of greatness and glory. He wanted everyone to see that he was a wonderful king. So what he does is he calls for all the big guys, all the big dudes. Of all the people, their importance to his kingdom, he calls for all of them. The satraps, the administrators, the governors, everybody who has a title, even to basically what we call the police department. He calls everyone to come to the dedication of this gold image. All right, so he's got this gold image. He's calling everyone to a dedication. He mounts this image on a plane of Dura, and it's just a plane so that it can be seen very easily. That's what this image. That's why it was put there, so it could be seen from all around. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Azariah, Hananiah, and Mishael are the God-given names, but right now the king of Babylon has given them new names. So that they're Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they have high positions too. So they have to come to the dedication of this image. They have to come because they're big dudes there. Now, I want you to know right now, Daniel is not present. I don't know where Daniel is. The Bible doesn't tell us, but Daniel is not there. He has no part in this part of the story. A lot of people get confused about that, but he is not here. Some of the scholars say, and I don't know if it's real or not, but some of the scholars say that they think King Nebuchadnezzar sent Daniel somewhere else so that he would not have to come against the king by trying to worship this image. So all the administrators, the governors, the satraps, they all gathered together, and King Nebuchadnezzar had a guy who announced things, and he told them, he said, we're going to have a band, and as soon as you hear this band play in a symphony with all of this music, it's all these different kinds of instruments, he says, I want you to fall down, and I want you to worship this image that he has set up. And whoever doesn't fall down is going to be cast into the burning fiery furnace. So there was an announcement made right off the bat that if you don't fall down and worship this image, you're going to be cast into a fiery furnace. So all of a sudden, a messenger gives them these instructions. Now, they were not asked to do this. They were commanded to do this. Wait for the orchestra to play and then fall down and worship. And, I thought about that. Would we truly be able to worship at a command? If someone says, I want you to worship, just like that, all of a sudden start worshiping. It's not possible. Worship is an act that comes within someone's spirit. Your spirit is quickened to worship, and it's not something that you can turn on or turn off with music, with an orchestra playing, and then all of a sudden you have to fall down and worship. But King Nebuchadnezzar thought that this was the way to do it because he worshiped pagan gods. So, I just can't imagine ready, set, go, worship all of a sudden. So there was probably at least hundreds of people of importance there. And so the music starts to play and everybody bows down. Now, just as a side note, the kiln that is the fiery furnace, it was kind of a vertical shaped tunnel. Like the bottom part is believed to have where you open it up and you get the ashes out, but you drop your stuff in the top of it. You got to kind of climb a ladder to go to the top of it and drop your stuff inside. So kind of visualize that. You have to go to the top to be dropped in. The stuff has to be dropped in from the top, but the ashes and all come out of a door at the bottom. So when the people heard the sound of these musical instruments of all kinds, they fell down. It says the people were of all nations, languages, and everything. They were from everywhere, and they fell down to worship this image that King Nebuchadnezzar set up for himself. And I'm sure it just thrilled him when he saw everyone do that. Now it says, therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans. Now, anytime the Bible says certain, it means they're set aside to do that. So they came forward and they accused the Jews, and they told King Nebuchadnezzar, they said, listen, you made a decree that when we heard this music, we're supposed to fall down and worship. But there are certain Jews. So again, they're set up. There were certain Jews. They were being watched. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were being watched. These certain Chaldeans were watching them. And they went and told, they were tattletales, they told the king. They said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, O king, they have not paid regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. So they tattled. So they were set aside. So King Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, now I don't know if you remember back in chapter 2, he had a rage and fury, or I think it was anger and fury or something like that. But he's got a little issue with his temperament. So here again, in rage and fury, that's pretty big. He gave command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to him. And he's mad. So they bring him to him. I'm sure they're pushing and shoving him. And these guys are young. They're still young men, very young. And he said, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? He confronts them. Now, if you're ready at the time you hear the sound, you can, in other words, he tells them, if you're ready, we'll do it again. And you have a chance to bow down and do it again, if you're ready. And he says, but if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately, not tomorrow, but immediately into the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? He's telling them. He's threatening them. He was in a rage and he was mad. And he said, is it true that you didn't bow down? So he gives them another chance to worship the image. And in verse 15, he asked them, who is the God who will deliver them? He asked them because he knows that their God will deliver them from the fiery furnace. I should read verse 15 to you. It says, now if you're ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, symphony with all your kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? So, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered, and they said, King Nebuchadnezzar, we're not going to even answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. So they're refusing. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. So these three young men were very brave right off the bat, and they said, you know, there's no reason to give us another chance. We're not going to do it. We're just not going to do it. Our God will protect us. And if he doesn't, we're still not going to worship your little g gods. They were very brave young men. They were confident in the Lord's ability to take care of them. So we move on, and it says King Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury. He's mad still. And the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times hotter than it's normally heated. And I thought about that, 7 times hotter than it's normally heated. Now, if he wanted them to suffer, he could have left it a little cooler in there, you know, but 7 times hotter just means they're going to burn up faster. So he was just kind of just in his rage. He was 7 times madder, so he wanted the furnace 7 times hotter. And he commanded certain men of valor, his men, his mighty men, to bind them, tie them up, and cast them into the fiery furnace. So they did. And it says certain men, mighty men in the army. Now, they must have been real brave, mighty men to take care of these boys like this. These are teenage boys, or just very, very young men. Now, they were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and they were cast into the fiery furnace. The flames were so hot that the men that took them up there to throw them in, they were immediately killed because the fire was just so hot. So they were called the men of valor, and it was the heat of the flames that actually killed them. So he loses his mighty men by messing with these young boys like this. So the boys were thrown in. They fell in the fire, and you have to think about that being thrown in. I don't know, if they landed on their knees, their back, their stomachs, their faces. I think they were just thrown into that shaft of the furnace. And so all of a sudden, the king Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. He rose in haste, he stood up very fast, and he spoke to his counselors. Did we not cast 3 men into the midst of the fire? And they answered the king and said, yes. Look, he said, I see 4 men loose. They're loose because the boys were tied up, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the former, the 4th, is like the Son of God. So here's a little, artist picture. It's kind of elementary, but it's showing what King Nebuchadnezzar sees. This is King Nebuchadnezzar, and he sees Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he sees a 4th man that he says is like the Son of God. Now, these young men should have died instantly, of course. King Nebuchadnezzar was in a state of fury not too long ago. Now he's astonished. He's going through a whole bunch of stuff. So he's watching them. He's standing up. He's just not sure. He's checking his math because there's 4 men in the fire now, in the furnace. And the men were still alive. They weren't burnt. They weren't wounded. They weren't even hurt. They were walking around. And it says, then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke. He calls out to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he says, come out from the midst of that fire. And the satraps, administrators, the governors, and all the people that were there saw these men whose body had no fire on them. Their hair wasn't singed. Their clothes didn't smell. They were just astonished that nothing had happened to these boys. And he said that these men served the Most High God. He says that in verse 26. Let me read that to you. He says, he went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace. And I think it's funny that he went near the mouth. He knew his men of valor had been killed by going there from the flames. but apparently they had just turned it down. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God. He calls them, you are the servants of the Most High God. He recognizes that again, just like he did in chapter 2, when he recognized that Daniel's God was the God of all gods. He was the King of Kings when he told him the meaning of the dream and what the dream was. And they inspected the bodies of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. No fire had power over their bodies. Their hair or their head was not singed. You know, anytime you have a little fire at home, your clothes smell like fire or your hair smells like fire. They had no smell on them, is what the Bible says. And so King Nebuchadnezzar said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. He's recognizing again that these boys are not going to worship his little g gods. They're just not going to do it. And so he goes on to say in verse 29, therefore I must make a decree. Remember, a decree is like a letter that cannot be revoked, that any people, nation, or language which speaks against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut into pieces, and their homes shall be made an ash heap. Remember that last time in the last lesson, he said that if his astrologers and those type of the soothsayers and all them, if they couldn't interpret his dream, he told them that their families would be, their houses would be made ash heaps, and they would be cut up into pieces. So he's going to hack them up again if anybody speaks against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God. They don't have to worship God, but they can't speak against him. He says, because there is no other God who can deliver like this God can. He's just totally in awe of what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God has done, which is our God, our Father. Then he promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Chapter 2, they got a promotion. And that was because Daniel had asked for them to have a promotion along with him. So, it says here they got a promotion that's already happened twice. We're only in chapter 3. They've almost been killed twice, and they've been delivered from death twice because he was going to kill them in chapter 2 if they couldn't tell the dream. But God delivered them each and every time from this, from their worries from King Nebuchadnezzar. King Nebuchadnezzar is really turning out to be a problem, but it's so fascinating to see how when he sees God work, that he changes his attitude and he realizes who God is. And we're going to see a whole lot more kind of craziness from King Nebuchadnezzar. Chapter 4 is very odd. So we're going to see more from him. So don't forget about Metal Man. We're going to talk about him again later. And don't forget that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would not worship this golden image of King Nebuchadnezzar that he made for himself because he thought he was all important. And don't forget that Daniel was missing when we always have heard the story of the fiery furnace. And, as children, we hear the story, and a lot of times we attribute it to Daniel, but Daniel was not there. Don't know where he was. Okay, guys, I'll see you next week for a couple more Sunday school lessons. Bye-bye.